According to the Wall Street Journal, AI-related investment accounts for half of GDP growth now. The billionaire David Sachs adds that a reversal would risk recession and we can't afford to go backwards. He tweeted that on November 24th. And the same day, coincidentally, I'm sure, that the White House announced that they're launching the Genesis mission. And what that is, the Department of Energy will build a national AI platform on top of US supercomputers and federal science data, train scientific foundation models, and run AI agents in robotic labs to automate experiments in biotech, critical materials, nuclear fission, fusion, space quantum, and semiconductors. And this is what's going on at the billionaire class. Now, before I introduce any of the next topics, which is what's going on at the more popular electoral level, I just want to kind of dive into what I think what comes to mind when I hear Genesis mission, which is, first it's the book of Genesis, which is, it starts out with the story of Adam and Eve and them eating the apple of knowledge and getting cast out of paradise. I'm sure that's the metaphor they were looking for here. Then you get stories of fratricide with Cain and Abel. You get people building a tower so tall that God has to knock them down and make everyone unintelligible to one another with the Tower of Babel. You have such rife inequity and wickedness on the planet that God tells Noah he's just going to hit reset and flood the planet. You get another story of fratricide with Jacob and Esau. You get a story of Joseph being sold into captivity by his brothers. And then it ends with this promise of the promised land, and you start out with the book of Exodus, So I'm not sure what of that is really, I can see a lot of parallels for how this might run out in that. I don't think any of them are what anyone intended. And the other one I think of, and I'm sure my next guest will appreciate this, is Star Trek and the Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
The Genesis Project, which is, again, is it a weapon? Is it going to create life on a rocky planet? And spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't come to it, in the next movie after The Wrath of Khan, it creates life so unstable that it implodes the entire planet or explodes the entire planet. I don't quite recall. With all of that as kind of the introductory backdrop, my next guest is my friend. He's a writer. He's the host of The Zero Hour with Richard Eskow. He is, you can find that on Free Speech TV Weekly and on WCPT AM and KTNF AM and We Act Radio in Washington, D.C., at Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and D.C., respectively. And without further taking up monologue time here, Richard, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's always my pleasure, Troy. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure likewise. And, the other part of this that I'll just kind of throw in there to introduce all of what we decided we were going to talk about is that we have, on the electoral level, very positive things. I mean, we have Zohran Mamdani, just, what the people are voting for, I'll summarize it before I introduce anymore, is essentially economic populism, is affordability, is democratic socialism, for lack, that's straight up who they voted for with Zohran and Katie Wilson in Seattle. And I like these two headlines here juxtaposed by each other. And that's Seattle's next mayor is willing to meet with anyone, including Trump. That's from the Seattle Times earlier today. And then Fox News, Seattle is about to get New York's hammer and sickle treatment. Socialism is coming your way. And these two stories, I think, really do come together in that the elite are telling us that we have to use all of our public resources, all of the might of the U.S. government, and everything we've ever researched with public dollars to build a supercomputer AI. And basically, I think all of that's going to end up privatized. And on the other hand, you have people demanding that our system start working, for people, and that we get some common ownership and some common stakes into the commons. So, Richard, with that, anything you want to pick up on? And I'm, that's a lot of introduction, so take it where you will.
Yeah, but they tie together, and I think as we talk, Troy, we'll see more and more how they tie together. And by the way, the Star Trek reference, it's not just Wrath of Khan and the Genesis project that destroyed a planet. They also use the word Genesis on Star Trek The Next Generation in an episode where some technology turned the crew into their quote unquote primitive ancestors, violent and brutal and, malformed, which I think is unfair to human ancestors who are probably more civilized in some ways than we are today. But they're not called, and of course, they're also Genesis is, creation, right? So they're also taking upon themselves godlike powers
that's another whole aspect of it. And I think the unintended and intended consequences of that, allegorically through the book of Genesis are pretty clear.
It's not going to work out well, as I believe is the biblical message.
Maybe this time, right?
Yeah, right. But I also wanted to point you to, maybe as a bridge to link these two topics. I read the executive order from Trump creating the Genesis mission. And there were just three words or three phrases rather, that jumped out at me. One, the first was the Manhattan Project that was instrumental to our victory in World War II, is the way he puts it. He wants to make it a Manhattan Project, but the Manhattan Project was all government. There were no private contractors that I'm aware of in the Manhattan Project. It was way too top secret, and nobody in the private sector owned the results of their work. And of course, the result of their work was the atom bomb. So I'm not saying humanity is better off for having the atom bomb, but the next phrase kind of diverges, shows where this diverges from the Manhattan Project. He lists all these, the executive order lists all these American laboratories, resources of various kinds of databases, and then says, these organizations, along with approved private sector partners, at which point the rational person goes, uh-oh. And the partners listed on this at the White House website, I don't know if I can find it real quickly, NVIDIA, Anthropic, Amazon, AMD, Microsoft, IBM, OpenAI, Google. In other words, a kind of like rogues gallery of the exploitative corporations that are ripping us off. So that basically this is another, the new power grab isn't, raiding Fort Knox for the gold, because we're not on the gold standard anymore. The new power theft, the new great theft is data. And by stealing massive amounts of public data, as they did with Social Security, as they've done with other government resources, that's the mother lode. And that's what they're after. And the third phrase that I highlighted, just to bring it all back to places like workplaces, is one of the uses they expect to put this to, besides advancing science and all these glorious things, supposedly, is enhance workforce productivity. And bearing in mind that we are not living in the Jetsons future, where a more productive workforce means more money for less work for working people, we're living in a future where more productivity means less pay and more unemployment and underemployment. So this is a massive, as far as I can tell, yet one more, this time government-sponsored rip-off of the American people. And last comment about data, they're mining our data. That's our resource. That's a, sort of a mantra of mine. And if there's anything West Virginians in particular ought to understand, is strip mining. And, they want to take everything we do, replace us with mediocre, crappy bots wherever they can, underpay us everywhere else. And it's our government doing it.
Yeah, and I've pulled up the executive order on the website there and highlighted where it talks about enhanced workforce productivity. What, of course, West Virginia politicians are more focused on is that secure energy dominance, which our governor has a plan to build out 50 gigawatts of energy production in West Virginia by 2050, which is just it's an unrealistic goal, but if it's going to be accomplished in any way, it's going to be done through these different handouts to data center production and all of that.
Right.
Absolutely. And we talked about this in our last conversation about how it's very much strip mining for us. And I think it's strip mining our data. And I mean, it really is. It's the digital frontier. And it's a place where now the monopolist interests is going to the U.S. government and basically saying, hey, we need help exterminating all of these pesky other people, other rules out on our land and all of this. And we need your help also making sure that everything produced here comes first to our coffers and then never to anywhere else. We'll reinvest it. Don't worry about it. Don't tax us on it. Don't expect us to reinvest it into human needs and all of this. But absolutely, just kind of give us free reign here. Yeah, and that is where I think the demand, what we're seeing electorally, is the absolute rejection of that. And I have another tweet up here, and this is from More Perfect Union is the original tweet that says, new polling in New York State shows that 60% of the population supports increasing taxes on the top 5% of income earners. And I think what people will hear that and think is, oh, liberal New York State. And and I know that the vast majority of what actually makes up New York State is a lot more socially and politically like West Virginia here in this whole region of the country than it is like New York State or New York City, right? And even parts of New York City aren't like people think New York City is.
Yeah, I mean,
I think these things are completely related. I think people are seeing how the capital development is going, and some people say that this is it's communist projects and all of this. Donald Trump buying stakes into into Intel and these other companies. That's communism. The reality is actually those merged interests are definitionally that's what Mussolini would call fascism.
Right. No, well, that is a classic definition of fascism is, a state corporate alliance. And, public shares in a corporation are not necessarily a bad thing. But when they're public shares with a government that is already inclined to favor corporate wealth and billionaire wealth, now has another motivation to do so, that is a bad thing. So, all of this ties together. And in terms of New York State, look, I'm from Utica, New York, which is a classic Rust Belt devastated city. It's considered a Rust Belt city. You go a half hour outside Utica, you might as well be in Appalachia, literally. I mean, if you go to the Adirondack Mountains, it's very much culturally rural.
Oh, it's part of the Appalachian region. I mean, it is.
Yeah,
and right.
Yeah, and we used to go there, every summer, and and as you say, and when we moved down to closer to New York City, to the outside New York City, at that time there was a horse farm behind our house in the New York City suburbs, and at that time I looked it up. New York City had more horses per capita than any other. I mean, New York State had more, despite New York City, had more horses per capita than any other state in the Union. I'm sure that's no longer true. But so, yes, in a way, New York State is a microcosm. It has mountains, it has industrial areas, it has urban areas. So, I wouldn't write it off. And you can bet that the centrists who are saying, well, it's just an aberration, it's New York City, wouldn't be saying that if Andrew Cuomo had won.
Right. Well, and that's, at the beginning of this year, I started when Zoran started, or Mayor Mamdani now, started doing very well.
Mayor-elect till January 1.
Mayor-elect,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I said, look, as a Democrat in the red state, an economic populist, I know that no matter what happens, whether he wins or loses, I'm going to be told that it's proof that we can only have Joe Manchin again, or some version of Joe Manchin again, or our own Andrew Cuomo, essentially. Different types of villainy, I guess. But I mean, this is, and I think what's really important to understand is that these are not things that are happening independent of each other. Again, people are seeing the way that AI is. A lot of people are seeing the way that AI is being deployed, just kind of without asking. All of a sudden, you open up Google Chrome, and now you're getting prompts to interact with the AI, and people realize that, like, the promise that we were given of AI every time we talk about it is not what we're getting. What we're getting is a cash grab, and a cash grab that is coming at our expense. And one of these days, I'm going to get the Emmy Award-winning video journalist John Russell on, who just did a really good documentary with More Perfect Union and 100 Days in Appalachia, looking at the data center issue in West Virginia and Appalachia, which we discussed last time. And should be discussed as frequently as possible, because it's, again, another, I mean, even if you put it on mountaintop removal land, and even if you make a completely self-generating power source there, and even if you create 5 jobs for the next 50 years, what you're locking up and what's going on there isn't necessarily worth the trade-off for people. I mean, I'm seeing now the just open conversation that basically McDowell County and other counties in West Virginia and the coal fields should plan to basically just lose all of their people, and it'll go back to the way it was before coal mining ever came, which of course it can't. You know, you can never go back again. You can't cross the same river stream twice, and especially not when you've blown up a mountain and put it into the stream. You're not going back to what it was. And frankly, I find it all offensive. It's like this sense that the economy is something that we must make sure policy-wise works for billionaires, but that otherwise we are all just subject to. And we should get over it if we have a problem with what we're being subjected to. That's a lot of monologue on my part, but your thoughts?
No, and it's why the Jeffrey Epstein story has such legs with the MAGA crowd, because I've been saying for a long time, you know, for example, the QAnon pedophile story was crazy in a million ways. But I've been saying for years now that it has a metaphorical truth to it, that they are, quote unquote, you know, feeding off our children and our future. And people have people intuit that, but they don't know how to articulate it, which leaves an opportunity for stories like QAnon to take hold. And I mean, all of these votes, you can break them out, but the Democrats had a very good November, and so far it's not over yet. I got a couple more days, but you know, there's a difference. You know, you could say, well, the Abigail Spanberger vote, for example, for a more mainstream Democrat, those votes you could call rejections of Trumpism or frustrations with Trumpism. But it's more than that. People are demanding, even now, you have some hack like James Carville saying, you know, we need economic rage. But places like West Virginia in particular, you and I have talked about this. I did the research. Bernie Sanders, you know, I'm not wedded to the term democratic socialist, but Bernie Sanders, with that label in 2016, before people had heard it before, got more votes in the primary than Trump and Hillary Clinton combined. So clearly there is a, you know, set of people in that state, your state, who want something different. I think that's what Mamdani showed. I don't think there was like I don't think the polls showed a yearning for something called democratic socialism. They wanted somebody who was clearly not part of this broken system, which includes, in a lot of people's minds, like mine, most Democrats as well as Republicans, they wanted different ideas. They wanted people to give a damn about their lives and their suffering. They didn't want people who were clearly indifferent. And again, the Epstein story, as well as the AI story, is a great counterpoint to all of this, because it's an epic example of elite indifference and arrogance and sense of impunity, that they can do whatever they want, which just reinforces the anti-elite populist emotions that, frankly, it horrifies mainstreamers when I said this. I'm all for, provided they're channeled correctly. The populists of the 19th century, I think we're, one of the greatest movements this country's ever had. I consider myself a left populist. And the way it's used among elites is basically just like the rowdy majority. But, I think it's about talking to people's needs. And I think there's a huge opportunity in a place like West Virginia to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I will say about the Spanberger thing is, even with, you can say, oh, they're more moderate Democrats, but she had AOC send out a fundraising email and a get out the vote type work for her. Uh-huh. She wouldn't have won in that way if she hadn't won the people who are feeling that also, right? And I pulled up here just the headline from James Carville, which is the New York Times, and the short version says "Out with woke, in with rage," which I think is just an incredible thing, because I think the whole, what people think of as woke was a production of the Clinton wing of the party,
right?
Or it was co-opted by that. I mean, I heard that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And let's talk about that, because I think it's important. I've been thinking about it a lot. I read the Carville op-ed. I thought about responding to it, but there's long been I agree with you 100% that the woke, as we think of it now, or as it's perceived now in the media and elsewhere, I do think is a creature of the Clinton century.
I think it gets summed up in that one line of, would breaking up the bank solve sexism?
Right, which racism,
right? But it was right, implied as all of these,
which of course issues. it would do huge things to counteract the material effects of racism. Because haven't you ever heard of redlining, Madam Secretary? So. But yeah, that was the whole strategy against Bernie, was, we'll say that it's racist and sexist to talk about people being ripped off. And that's a perception that stayed until now, because the history of women's rights, of racial equality, of ethnic and religious solidarity is really, in this country, originates with the union movement in West Virginia, with communists, with socialists. It's very much a left agenda, until they decided to create a kind of identity politics that is anti-left. This is why I hate the expression "breaking the glass ceiling" forever. For example, why do we have a ceiling, right? Why doesn't everybody just make a decent living? Why you have to, it's hierarchical instead of equal. So they created this thing. And then I think the mainstream Democratic view is that people who are resentful of like trans rights, or trans girls using girls' bathrooms in high schools or whatever, that they're just horrible people. But to me, again, I go to voter instinct, and I think what people intuit about that, the classic example to me is when the aptly named Cracker Barrel restaurant chain, which I happen to really like, um,
Right.
my daughter and I, make pilgrimages. It's not close by, but when they introduced the Impossible Burger, the vegan burger, and everybody went, and people supposedly went nuts. I don't know how much they did, but the sense that no, you don't have a say. We don't care what you think. We know
Right.
better than you. I think a lot of resentment of LGBTQ issues, of even racial issues, gender issues, is just stop telling us what to do. And so, that headline that the Times gave, but it reflects Carville's piece, is we need economic rage and to throw away. Whoa, well, no, I don't think that's exactly right. I think if people believe you're for real, there's a way to say, look, what do you care if one trans girl gets on a soccer team in Indiana? If her teammates are fine with it, why are you worrying about that when they're ripping us off every day we go to work? And to me, that's, that you don't have to reject anything. You just have to stand for something. But of course, they don't want to do that because that's a rejection of their, their corporate sponsorship, which is something which has engendered a lot of this, no pun intended, gender and identity politics. The best thing you can do for millions of women right now, talking about gender politics, raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour. Boy, would a lot of women be happy. The whole white fragility thing. No, I want, white people to reflect on their privilege. I've always wanted to say, take a bunch of Black single moms, put them in a focus group, let's say ones who are working fast food restaurants, and ask them, would you like a lot of white people to reflect on their privilege? If you had a choice between that, would you pick that or $30 an hour and your boss has to tell you a week in advance when your shift is so you can get daycare? That's my spiel about identity politics and class politics.
Well, and that's the thing is first of all, I'm a big proponent of a 21st century economic bill of rights. And with that, the thing is, it's for everyone. We have to get back to the universal politics. And I think that's what we see with Zoran resonating, with the public service commissions in Georgia winning their first statewide seats in a quarter of a century over affordability for utility rates. They're not saying, we need to do utility reparations and make sure that, we means test who gets affordable utility rates and all of this type of thing. We have to go back to basic universal things, universal rights and universal, dare I say, privileges of being an American citizen or being an American, being here in America. We have to get back to raising the minimum wage. That's for everyone. We have to get back to stronger union protections for everyone who wants to join a union. Make it as easy as possible for people to stand together and demand what they actually want from the people who most affect them. And expand and improve Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We have to get past this whole means testing for this and that, so that if you're this poor, you have to pay full for everything. But if you're poorer, right? Because it all gets back to the old tyrant's trick of dividing us all and keeping us divided. And I see this argument on Twitter, which I'm still on Twitter, as people saw when I pulled up tweets earlier. One, unfortunately, there's still information there and there's still current events there. But I see these, and I swear they're manufactured arguments, right? Because we're having now this dual fight on the right between we need to deport all the immigrants because they're using up all of our services. But then, I don't know if you've caught this, but then there's the Ron DeSantis and others are saying we need to abolish property taxes. which I, first of all, just have to go, oh, wow, they're defunding the police now. And I said that
Right.
a couple
That's
years
true,
ago
yeah.
when they started talking
And the
about it.
schools, of course.
And
Yeah.
the schools, right? But then the other thing, the other fight people started going is, oh, that would disproportionately benefit boomers. And boomers have all the wealth, right? 70% of boomers have 30% of whatever the numbers are, to which I always have to go, yes, but there is still a cross section there of a lot of boomers are not, and it's not to, it's the way they use it is, of course, is a derogatory term, but a lot of older Americans are barely getting by. The majority, I would say. And just because most of the houses that are owned in America were bought, all these years ago for a semi-reasonable price, doesn't mean that the problem isn't more, the young billionaires and the old billionaires have 90% of everything, right? Like there's an intergenerational class.
And the billionaire boomers skew everything because they've had more time than their millennial counterparts on average, the very wealthy ones. I mean, obviously you have the outlier younger boomers, Zuckerberg and Musk and everything, but Bill Gates has been collecting his money for a long, long time.
Right.
And the idea, it's all division, right? It's all, greedy geezers and so on. When
Right.
A lot of people don't have, seniors don't have any wealth at all. More than half of them rely on Social Security for their.
I can say, the Washington Post ran this report the other
Yes,
day
it was excellent.
about
The top 20 billionaires
influencing American politics, and most of them are older. But then there's Zuckerberg and Musk, and plenty of younger billionaires who are literally just rigging the system. And for them, it's what is it? For an average American, it'd be the equivalent of putting $160 towards elections relative to their wealth. And this is what they just drop, basically, to make sure that for the next 2 to 4 years, they can make sure the system will stay rigged in their favor.
Another way to look at most boomers is that they've had more time to be ripped off by billionaires. Right. And the statistics about poverty rates and financial insecurity among seniors, they're real. And when people say, well, boomers have all the wealth, well, which boomers do you mean? You mean the ones in the inner city? You mean the ones on the Navajo reservations? Let's get specific here. But
you also end up with a big selection bias, by the way, because people who have more assets are more likely to live longer. So you're going to end up skewing 100%. Everything like that.
Right, 100%. And then you have, this is my argument with most YIMBY, yes, Bill, we have a huge housing problem in this country. So let's take where I live now. Let's take Silver Spring, Maryland. You can do one of two. There are people, it's mostly lower middle class. I mean, there's some wealthy areas, there's some poorer areas, but now there are two ways you can address housing in a place like Silver Spring, right? Or just as a microcosm, obviously you can't impose taxes on a city level, but you could tax the wealthy and build affordable housing for people. That's one way. Another way, the YIMBY way, is to take somebody who's 80, who's maybe got $100,000 of equity in a house, which sounds like a lot, but that's all they've got. They don't have any savings. They can't move anywhere because they couldn't afford it. They can't sell and grab the 100,000 because they couldn't afford to move. So they have this paper wealth of 100,000. The other thing you can do is you can deregulate that person's let's say my majority minority neighborhood and build a lot more housing there, which won't really solve in the end run the problem anyway, because it's private sector and market driven. But it devastates their little tiny bit of wealth and leaves the billionaires intact. So my argument with YIMBY is not that there might not be a chance to do creative things with those spaces, but that, once again, as with data and jobs and automation and all of that, oh, we need more resources. Let's screw the working people a little more and leave the billionaires alone. That's a through line to me in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to the narrative frame of this is who is the massive Manhattan Project style government intervention going to benefit ultimately. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of guarantee that most people are going to benefit from it. Now, and that's because I think, Trump is one animal. And what you have actually is basically the Project 2025 people running the show. And that's the, longstanding Birch Society through line and the Powell memo through line all the way through history. There's nothing new under the sun there. I think what's new under the sun is that they've realized that if they seed the ground, CEDE, not SEED,
Right.
seed the ground to the Nick Fuentes world and the deport all these immigrants world and all of this, then they can rip off people all day long. And as long as more immigrants are, as long as there's violent scenes of ICE that they can rejoice over, then it's fine. I think that's being proven. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene's exit, I think, demonstrates that is not resonating with the base closer down. But more than that, Trump's embrace of Zoran. And their statement basically like, look, we want a lot of the same things, and how we get there is what we disagree on. And which was when I ran for House of Delegates here in West Virginia last year. That's one of the things. I had this economic Bill of Rights. It was the thing I ran to, or I used basically as my entire narrative framing for every single thing, and my main thing was, look, the way you implement this at the legislature is you go down there and every bill, you hold it up and you go, is it working to secure one of these rights, or is it working to take one of these rights away? That's it. And then you throw the ones that are bad and you keep the ones that are good. And as long as the Republicans agree that we want to do these things, we should be able to do it, even with the current legislative makeup. The problem is they are reluctant to say we have a right to a job and a living wage, or we have the right to certainly collective bargaining, and right to safe and decent affordable housing. They all of a sudden start having this. That's communism. But I think Trump is demonstrating that, like, first of all, it's not. And second of all, there is their dear leader has nodded to say, yes, you can fight for real economic populism as a Republican. Now, that's tearing up their party in all of this. Who will continue to bend the knee versus the Mitch McConnell wing, which is increasingly frail, both metaphorically and literally. But I'm glad to see James Carville on our side start saying, it's 1,000 times better than let's play dead and let people hate Trump, because it's actually starting towards a real positive vision of an agenda that we can do. And we need
but it's also an attempt, sorry to interrupt, but it's also an attempt to hijack that vision. Obviously.
Absolutely.
We know that James Carville is wealthy because of billionaire donors, and he's not going to do anything to endanger that. We know that Donald Trump doesn't take it seriously either. We know that Donald Trump, he probably, what's that expression? Game, respect, game. Kind of. He knows that Zoran's good, and he appreciates his style, but also he knows that politics excites people. He doesn't mean it either when he says we want to work on affordability together, but it's definitely a sign that we have the winning hand, but it's also a red flag. And not that I'm saying you are, but not to be taken in by the Trumps and Carvilles of this world that are, Trojan horses for corporate power. So
no, but what I will say, and I think that's true. I mean, I think that's the thing. We want to be very careful about believing any of them. any of the billionaires or many multi-millionaires who have enriched themselves through the system, like James Carville has. But I think there is something to be said about if Zoran, who has been just absolutely maligned as everything that's supposed to scare a rural American about anything, if he can go to the White House, stand his ground, and get Trump to say, we agree on a lot of the things we want to do, then I think that is an absolute green flag for progressives and populists, however we want to describe people like ourselves, economic populists and true populists, not the BS on the right that's only for some people. National socialism is what they actually are. But then we should be bold in taking these ideas to our voters here in the reddest of red places. As you pointed out 1,000 times now over the last decade, Bernie Sanders performed very well. He outperformed Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in their respective primaries. And the thing that I just keep on saying this, and maybe someday someone will hear it and actually put some money towards the idea. But there's one think tank that Democrats need right now, and it's a think tank dedicated entirely to doing what Project 2025 did for the Powell memo of a step-by-step process, executive actions, legislative actions to dismantle the Great Society and dismantle the New Deal and take us back to the roaring 20s. But we need that for the Economic Bill of Rights. We need that. We need an American Legislative Exchange Council that is just working on how do we make sure that the states can regulate AI. And we didn't even, I forgot to even mention that whole push from the federal level, from Trump administration and so on, to create uniform federal regulations. First of all, so much for the 10th Amendment conservatives, I guess. But that just would supersede any state that wanted to regulate AI or data center manufacturing or anything that would stand in the way of Project Genesis or Mission Genesis or whatever. Okay. But the pivot I want to take is that you actually wrote an article a couple of weeks ago or it was right around the time that Zoran was elected. And it described how surprisingly affordable actually most of his proposals are. And I think that starts getting to the how do we take these more amorphous rights that we were fighting for, and how do we actually do the implementation? Because that's what I feel like progressives are always up against, is the idea that we can win elections, but we can't govern, and we can't deliver because we can't govern. And so I wanted to hear about how surprisingly affordable these things are.
Well, if you take, by the way, he also has proposals to regulate AI, which are very good. But if you take I think it's 4 key proposals. Let's see, it's free universal childcare, free buses, city-run grocery stores, and rent control. If you take childcare out of the equation, the total cost of all of it is about 2% of New York City's budget. So that's not exactly breaking the bank, right? And paid for largely by a 2% surtax on income over $1 million a year, which would mean people in that bracket still aren't paying as much as they were paying before 2017 when the Trump tax cuts went through. Free buses, well, they're already carrying the costs of operating the buses. So you could say there's no wholesale cost. Retail, they'd lose about $600 million, according to the New York Times, in annual income. New York City has a city budget of about $116 billion. So that's a small fraction. City-run grocery stores, they'd use for the pilot program, they'd use city-owned properties rather. And so the estimated cost of the pilot was $60 million, which is about 0.05% of the New York City budget. And that and New York City residents pay more on average of their total income for food than does the average American. They also pay more for rent than the average American. So the affordability problem is very real there. Rent control costs nothing, and arguably boosts the city's GDP. I'm sure it would, actually, because people would have more to spend on the daily necessities. And as for universal child care, if he can, that's a state decision. If he can get the state to agree to it, then horror of horrors, the top corporate tax rate in New York State would be at 11.5%, the same as it is across the river in the People's Republic of New Jersey. So it's not, none of this is crazy. And by the way, it's possible that he seriously overestimates the costs. I wrote about that of the child care program, but even if it does, and it's immensely popular, and New Mexico is doing it, other people are looking at it. The other thing is that other people are looking at elements of his program. Even Bloomberg had a limited trial run, a Republican mayor, or a Democratic, but switched from Republican. The billionaire mayor had a limited free bus route proposal. In my county, we have a free bus system that part of our system is free. None of this is New York City had rent control for many decades. One of the reasons that my grandfather could be the sole provider of a family of four with a two-bedroom apartment in New York City as a tailor. I mean, this is not crazy stuff either. But the presentation of it is not unlike the Economic Bill of Rights, and that is the presentation of it scares people, one, and two, billionaires cheap. They don't want to pay the city 2% if they don't have to. But none of it is crazy. The thing is not only affordable, but it's all built around a premise. And the premise is that working people, ordinary people, so to speak, nobody's ordinary, have a right to a decent life. And, that's what horrifies people. Now, West Virginia, it would be a fascinating experiment. I'd love to help you all and somebody with it to figure out what the equivalent proposals would be for the state of West Virginia. I can see childcare working, but maybe something with education. Teachers have a lot of support, as we saw in 2017 teacher strike. But of course, public transportation would mean something completely different in West Virginia. Right. Except for your rural Charleston and Charlestown and a couple of places, but it would be really interesting. Is it intercity electric buses? Is it minimum wage? Is it, worker-owned initiatives to, increase employment? Is it rehabbing, hiring the unemployed to rehab houses, because there are a lot of houses. I'm just riffing, but, it would be a great project to look at. Wow, what can West Virginia do? I know Sam Petzock or somebody knew about this project. The lawyer knew something about this project of creating alternative water sources in a village a town whose water supply was there. Could do a million things. It wouldn't cost that much. It could show people what we can do together through government.
Yeah, and I'll say there's a number of places that are doing very much that. I'll give a shout out to the Coalfield Development Corporation, which is doing. I mean, they take people out of treatment and put people into apprenticeships, and they start by dismantling old houses and then selling the wood, the reclaimed wood, repurposing the reclaimed wood. They have a building down there that's all solar powered, and that is another whole training exercise that gets people onto their feet and doing real work. And this is the article from Richard Eskow. Please note Zohran Mamdani's proposals are surprisingly affordable. That's over at Common Dreams. I think it was originally published at your Substack, which is
zerohourreport.com. How can
zerohourreport.com. But yeah, I mean, I think all of these are I mean, it goes back to, first of all, they're universal things. It's not saying that it's not checking your income, your W-2 as you get on the
Right.
bus. You're not being the child care proposal. I don't know about what the details are of that, but it needs to be universal,
It
affordable
is
child
universal.
care, ideally guaranteed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mom
and
Donnie's is universal. Yeah. Yeah. New
right, it
Mexico's
needs
is
to be,
universal. Yeah.
because you can't have, if the billionaires are sorted out amongst themselves, they will always, well, it doesn't matter whether they're grouped in or not. They will vie to not have to pay 1 cent more than they've hoarded, because I mean, they either honestly believe. I mean, I think they honestly believe that they can spend that money better and wiser than the federal government. And what people need to remember is that the federal government is accountable to us, all of us. Again, it's a universal type program.
And
It's
so
the
is the
most
state
universal.
government. So is every government,
Right,
And Mamdani is showing, because he has a big city to run, what you can do at the municipal level. What West
right.
Virginia could show what you can do. West Virginia is the future of America in certain ways. In other ways, it's very unique. But in terms of the environmental harm that's already been done through mining and so on. So, West Virginia has a very different set of problems. New York City is unaffordable. West Virginia lacks opportunity, and people are leaving and so on. But just
Well, and
generating the
let's be very clear. West
topsoil.
Virginia is not a monolith either,
Of
and
course, no, I
there
know, and
are
I'm speaking.
certainly there are certainly places in West Virginia that have exactly the same urban problems.
Yeah,
I've been reading
I,
through
I
this.
think Charlestown does, doesn't it? I mean, it has a
Charleston, yeah, Charleston,
Charleston. Yeah,
and
excuse me, I get them confused.
Charlestown has, I mean, if you go to any community group within any municipality, I think anywhere in the country, you're going to find somebody griping about the visibility of homelessness, which is, again, an affordability crisis as much as an opportunity crisis, as much as is a mental health crisis. In all different
Right,
circumstances,
right,
nobody is without shelter for one. It's not that everybody is without shelter for the same reason, right?
right, right.
But the
And yet,
I'm reading
housing
this book.
costs are in national terms low.
Yep,
So yeah, you should be able to house. West Virginia is almost like a baronial estate in terms of the history with the
absolutely,
coal
yes.
mining owners, the bosses. I mean,
And much of our land is still owned by Wall Street and other out-of-state interests.
yeah. And
Um,
why shouldn't they be paying more? Louisiana has an extraction tax. Uh, why shouldn't West Virginia? And what about the topsoil? Who's going to pay to put people to work planting to get that topsoil so that the flooding isn't as bad? You see, I know more than West Virginia than you might think, but I don't know a lot, but I do know flooding can be terrible. Okay, get some people in there planning. The rest of the country needs cheap stuff. Break down those houses, create a people's IKEA. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do with will and a little imagination.
well, yeah, that's what it really comes down to. And I will say, I've been reading through this book, Jacob Silverman's Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. I'm sure there's a lot in there that you're actually very familiar with. And a lot of it I was familiar with, but it's nice to have it put into a coherent story. And there's things like, the test case laws to make homeless people invisible in San Francisco and the associated areas, and then Austin when they all fled over there for briefly. Those pieces of legislation have come directly into Wheeling, my hometown, Charleston,
Uh,
and it's all and it's that hadn't clicked to me yet that this was the spillover of the laboratory of autocracy in the People's Republic of San Francisco. And by people, I mean billionaires.
right.
We on the 0 Hour, you talked to Jason Boudin when he was doing his recall, another big part of this book, because that was another This is where the tech billionaires have decided that they've had their PAL memo moment of we have
Right.
to get political. The public is turning against us, and so we have to seize every means that we can to make sure that the public, even if they oppose us, can't. And this is where, again, I think take us back to the beginning of the story, the beginning of this conversation. Project Genesis is what the billionaires have bought through any number of means. The end of direct file was clearly Intuit just paid $1 million and got that
Right.
done. And with plenty of Democratic support, they donate to both sides of the aisles, as a lot of these billionaires do. And what people are doing is rejecting that outright at the ballot box. And so, I hate that. I wish there was a stronger thing I could make to kind of wrap this up beyond just like electoralism and go vote and get involved. That stuff is all critically important, and I will say people should. I think the Democratic Party is not without hope, and I think that hope entirely comes from below and people getting involved. And I think that hope mostly comes from rural areas where the Democratic Party has abandoned the place, and so five scrappy people can set up an executive committee or whatever your equivalent is in any part of the country and start demanding from the state party better damn politics.
And it doesn't have to be a Democratic Party organization either. It can be, I mean, look, Zoran came out of Democratic Socialists of America and used them as his field reserves. Yeah. I wouldn't say that would work in West Virginia necessarily, but the Granges, the populist movement, yep, put together Granges that help people, mutual aid organizations, yep, and then they pressured the elected people. And there are a million ways to do it. The thing is to get started and start. And I know there are seeds of it all over West Virginia because you've introduced me to some of them. But this should be a moment where they're electrified and want to do even more. So.
Yeah, and the history goes further back than even the mine wars. As Professor Harvey Kaye was on here a month or so ago, talking about how the Appalachian region was the site of a lot of the Democratic Republican clubs that really are kind of you can trace from Jefferson through to what the modern corrupt Democratic Party at the national level. But, these are local clubs. And with that, I'll say, and I thought this was fascinating that Harvey pointed out to me, that, aside from the Bible, when they've done surveys of, Appalachian libraries and what people had in their bookshelves and what was advertised in the newspapers for sale, it's the writings of Thomas Paine were basically, they were the most popular writings aside from the Bible. And I think that makes absolute sense. I think that sense of revolutionary and radical justice, agrarian justice, resonates. I think it resonates in the urban areas like New York City with the promises of universal programs like universal buses, universal childcare, affordable groceries that the government, backs basically. That would go a long way in West Virginia.
You'll run up against a lot of people saying, well, that's free stuff and, people shouldn't get free stuff. But it's not free stuff. It's stuff that, we work together to
exactly
provide each other. And what's free stuff is these coal bosses and other, industrial interests, including, the factories, the manufacturing sites that are set up, polluting our environment for free, taking our resources for free. Now we're just like saying, okay, here's the trade. You're taking our resources, you're taking our wealth. We want bus rides, simple.
Which is, it sounds like Thomas Paine to me. Basically, you have gotten this from the society, and now it is your obligation to pay into this. And by the way, you get the checks too, and you have to take them because you're in this damn boat with us all too. And I think that again, damn, there were a couple of thoughts that I had off of there, and now I have to remember where I was about to jump off with my bucket full of thoughts.
I was just going to say
what we're owed and what's being stolen from us. And
the older folks used to say, ain't no free lunch. Well, it's time to say that to the people who've been exploiting us. You've had a free lunch for
Right.
too long.
Well, and that's, I remember what it was now, and it goes back to the beginning of the story is, Genesis is full of cautionary tales, and we're not instructed to be like Cain and Abel, but
Right.
I think the politics of, that, oh, that's free stuff and I shouldn't help my neighbor or anything like that. It's a very Old Testament mentality, and it's the mentality that we were warned against in all of those stories. Like we shouldn't be the brothers selling Joseph into slavery, but that is very much and I do kind of wonder if like that's the end goal here that we're supposed to see from Project Genesis is yes, we're going to create the pharaonic system and we're all the Israelites for the rest of time.
Yeah, we need a little less of that, a little more of Matthew 5, I would say, if we're going to go theological here. So,
Amen. And with that, I will say thank you so much for your time today, Richard. It's always a pleasure. And Richard Eskow is a writer and host of the Zero Hour with Richard Eskow, which I also executive produce. Free Speech TV and radio stations all over the country and podcasts. Richard, any last thoughts before I let you go?
Enjoyed it as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. You take care.
You too.